But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before.
On November 5th, 2024, Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election for the second time, making him the 47th President of the United States. He is the first American president to be indicted for over 86 criminal charges, including federal charges. This raises an interesting hypothetical question. Could he pardon himself when he becomes the President of the United States? Before answering the question, what is the pardon power of the U.S. President? Currently, a sitting U.S. President could pardon anybody. There's a range of things a pardon can do, from completely erasing someone's conviction to delaying sentencing. It is like the get-out-of-jail-free card in Monopoly, but more powerful. The source of the presidential pardon power can be found in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution. It is specifically stated that, quote, he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. This is called the Pardon Clause. There are two limitations on the president's pardon power. The first limitation is the pardon can only be granted for offenses against the United States. This means that state criminal offenses and state and federal level civil claims are not covered. The second limitation is that the pardon power cannot be used in cases of impeachment. This means that the president cannot use the pardon power on an elected official to prevent that official from being removed. So theoretically, the president cannot pardon himself when he is getting impeached. The Supreme Court of the United States has recognized that the power given to the president to pardon is quite broad. The scope of the president's pardon power is illustrated in the 1866 case of Ex parte Garland. The Supreme Court ruled that the president's authority to pardon was unlimited except in cases of impeachment. The court said that the president has the authority to pardon, quote, every offense known to the law, end quote, and can be exercised, quote, either before legal proceedings are taken or during their pendency or after conviction and judgment, end quote. Other than these limitations, there are no limits on the president's pardon power. Turning back to the question then, can a sitting U.S. president pardon themselves? Let's start looking at this question through the textualist approach. There's a few things that the textualists say. Firstly, by reading the Constitution with ordinary meaning of the words, there's nothing to prevent presidents from pardoning themselves. There's no language specifying who may or may not be subject to a pardon. Secondly, the Constitution does not have a general provision against high officers of government making decisions when there is a conflict of interest. The principle of republicanism is that the high officials will live under the laws they make, meaning that they are supposed to take into account of their own self-interests as well as everybody else's when they make laws. There is no general constitutional principle that is against conflict of interests, let alone the pardon power. Thirdly, another argument in support of the president being able to pardon themselves is this act is political, not judicial in nature, and thus shielding it from the general principle in jurisprudence that you cannot be a judge in your own case. The argument is the president is not applying the law when he grants a pardon. He's making a policy decision based on considerations of what is good for the country and possibly reversing a miscarriage of justice. This is similar to the work of a court, but they are fundamentally different. Lastly, another argument among similar lines is that the pardon power is a political instrument that the president should be able to apply to himself if needed for the greater good of the country. Let's take the following hypothetical as an example. The President of the United States wants to bury a few documents. There may be really good reasons to bury those documents, perhaps because they would humiliate the head of another government in which the U.S. has strong foreign policy interests in. Suppose the destruction of those documents is a very good idea as a matter of policy, but arguably illegal. Now let's suppose the president realizes that the incoming president is a very vindictive political opponent who would want to bring criminal prosecution to discredit his predecessor. Therefore, the current president may think that a self-pardon is necessary, not only to shield himself from prosecution, but also to prevent harm to the country. In this hypothetical, the use of a presidential pardon power would be legitimate, preventing damages to U.S. foreign policy and serving the public interest. Like any power, the pardon power adheres to the general principle that power can be misused. However, there's also an opportunity for such power to be used for good purposes. Because the person in power will not be there forever, and the belief that presidents will be decent people who are elected with public interests at heart, presidents should have the authority to pardon themselves. But did the textualists go wrong in their analysis? Let's begin by considering the word pardon. The Latin root of pardon is donare, which means give, as in the word donate. One does not donate to himself. To give is to give something to another. The Constitution's architects did not address the possibility of the president pardoning himself because the use of the word pardon could never permit that possibility. Moving away from looking at the definition of the word, the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel stated in days before Richard Nixon's resignation in August 1974 that it is a, quote, fundamental rule that no one may be judged in his own case, end quote, and hence, quote, the president cannot pardon himself, end quote. A deeper argument against self-pardons can be constructed by examining the structure of the Constitution and the role of the president. The pardon power is seen as an act of mercy, necessary against injustice. Granting pardons as a matter of justice has long been a tradition in the United States. The pursuit of justice, however, is not the fundamental reason for the pardon power. The fundamental reason for the pardon power is to equip the president with a political instrument similar to that of the argument of the textualists to secure the public good in times of crisis. The purpose of the pardon is therefore not to bring justice, but to ensure peace and tranquility for the nation. An illustration of this power can be found in John Locke's chapter of Prerogative in his second treatise on government. In this chapter, Locke invokes a hypothetical. Suppose there's a person who lives in a neighborhood that was threatened by a wildfire. Consequently, he burned down the houses of his neighbors to save his own home and the rest of the neighborhood from this threat. Locke argued that the executive may pardon this arsonist because the public good was at stake. Locke, however, did not make a situation where the executive pardoned himself. He did not do so because he believed the executive is designed to serve the public good and not to serve themselves. It is not merely the principle that one should not be the judge of their own legal case. It is the executive should serve the public good and not exercise this prerogative for their own benefit. The wide breadth of the pardon power is to deal with unforeseen threats to the constitutional order. Yet it is senseless to allow the president to deploy such power if the threat to the constitutional order comes from the president himself. The textualists makes the argument that the Constitution does not have a general provision against high officers of government making decisions where there's a conflict of interest. The basis for this claim is true, but it does not permit these high officers of government to burst free from the confines of law. The source of the president's pardon power is derived in many ways from the British monarch's pardon power. In the British context, the issue of self-pardon would never occur because the king could do no wrong. However, the president is not a king. A self-pardon is something that would allow the president to escape the confines that the Constitution imposes and elevate the president closer to the status of a king. This is the opposite of what the Constitution intended. Even in the hypothetical described by textualists, where the president needs to invoke a self-pardon to protect an act deemed favorable by policy, the hypothetical makes several assumptions. Chiefly, it assumes that the president may become the sole arbiter by taking on the role of judging the righteousness of a policy act and weighing that against the rule of law. Secondly, it assumes that the subsequent president will sacrifice their agenda to pursue intense criminal prosecution against the former. At the end of the day, it seems that the President of the United States does not have the power to pardon himself. A self-pardon is inconsistent with the text of the Constitution, the intention of the Constitution, general principles of jurisprudence, and the fundamental principles that the United States is founded on. So the short answer is no. The sitting President of the United States cannot pardon himself.